The reports coming from Sam Amick of The Athletic are saying that he's more than likely going to be moved before the trade deadline. And if he is to be moved, his preferred destinations are Miami and New York. Do you guys have an insight or a prediction as to where you think he'll end up? Because I'm assuming that it will be at a place where he would want to re-sign this summer as well.
I think he will be a free agent. I mean, be a person of a lot of interest to a number of teams who are in the thick of the playoff race. If in fact he becomes available to be traded. I mean, DeMar DeRozan is an excellent basketball player, man. I've really admired this young man his entire career. He's averaged over 21 points a game for a career. He stays available. He's been relatively healthy the majority of his career. 6-time All-Star, 3 times All-NBA. He could be a guy that helps become that third option, if you will, on some of those teams that you mentioned, whether it be a New York or Miami. I would imagine that a team like the Lakers could be interested in him. He has proven the ability to score and score in the clutch and close games. He's not a volume or considered an excellent three-point shooter, but boy, is he lethal in that mid-range area. He can draw fouls, and I think he's just a really good professional. And he's 34 years old, and I think what teams will take into consideration is trying to figure out how much they think he has left. Personally, I think he has a good 2 to 3 years left at playing at a comparable level to where he's at right now. So I'm really excited. I don't have any information on who would be the lead in going after him, but I really like this player, and I think he could help take a team that's in the midst of that race and make them even stronger contenders for a deep playoff run.
Whenever I think of DeMar DeRozan, and seems just like yesterday, Scott, I was watching him come out of high school out here in LA. And suddenly now we're talking about he's got 15 years or so probably now in the NBA. But the thing that always stood out with me then was his professionalism. He was a pro when he came into this league. And the best ability is availability. And you touched on it there. He's available. He plays. He's been scoring at a very high clip for seems like his entire career. But more importantly, I think this player could be a key contributor to a championship caliber team. So I'm looking for him around the trade deadline to really be targeted by teams who think that a player like DeMar could push them over the top. A team that comes to mind, for instance, would be maybe the Minnesota Timberwolves or some team that really feels that they have a chance. So, this is the first I'm hearing of a player like him becoming available. We've talked about and we've touched on here, seemed like every week for the last 2 or 3 weeks about the Chicago Bulls, who is going to become available and what direction they're going to go in. So to hear that his name is out there, maybe this is triggering the rebuild that we've all speculated on. But I think that would be a good player to target if I were a team, especially right on the brink, because he's a player that could push you over the top.
So let's dive into some of these teams that you guys have mentioned. Let's start with the Timberwolves that BJ mentioned. How would you like the fit of Anthony Edwards and DeMar DeRozan? Because they're both players who need the ball in their hands. They're both players that can get cooking in the mid-range. And as Scott alluded to, DeMar's not really a player that's going to spot up on the three-point line and catch and shoot a whole bunch. So when you get into contending for a championship, especially in the playoffs, you're then taking the ball out of Anthony Edwards' hands. How would you fit both of those guys into a team?
Well, I don't know that you have to take the ball out of Anthony Edwards' hand per se. I think, again, that's where your coaches become heavily involved in creating an offensive structure that allows each of those players, to maximize each of those players' abilities. So anytime you get two really good players like that together, it's incumbent upon those coaches and the players themselves too to figure it out. And I think they can really coexist because Anthony Edwards he can score from all areas of the court, whether it's threes, mid-range, getting all the way to the basket. So I think that would be something that they could figure out.
Yeah, and the reason they come to mind is when you have a terrific player, or what I would consider Anthony Edwards to me he's moved into that top or elite category in the NBA.
Tell them what you text me the other night, BJ.
Well, I can't remember what he texted you. Well, we text each other.
BJ
1,000
said
times.
he's top 2 guards in the NBA right now.
Yeah,
top 2.
He's a top 5 player. He's a top 5 player now in the NBA of where he's performing, not only individually, but look at his team now. And he's carrying on that responsibility. And when players perform and they ascend, I like to acknowledge that, because in the end, when you have players that actually contribute to the bottom line and they're able to incorporate their individual talent, that's an art, that's a growth. So when you see a young man that's growing and he's ascended now to that level, this isn't like a fluke. Now he's doing it, and he's making his mark. I want to acknowledge that, because it's all about taking that word potential off of your name. And the reason I think that they could play together is because this is one of the things that has to happen with any team that's trying to ascend. The offense in the playoffs is always going to become stagnant because of how elite or how good the teams are as you advance through the playoffs, right? The second round is going to be more difficult than the first, so forth and so on. At some point here, you have to have multiple players who can play off the dribble. And if there's one thing that I see with the Minnesota Timberwolves, is, with the exception of Anthony Edwards, who's the other player that can consistently play off of the dribble? Because you're going to need that player at some point to surface. So with that, Anthony Edwards, you're going to have to defend. You're going to have to double team on me. And if you're going to double team him, that means there will be an opportunity for another player to create off the dribble to keep the defense honest. Okay, so you have Jokic, for instance, but Jamal Murray, suddenly now you're playing one-on-one basketball with, which is almost impossible with a player who can play off the dribble with that level of creativity and what he does. So I'm not saying that they should make a trade, because clearly they have something going there right now. But as the defenses become more familiar with their style of play, they're going to need another player who can create, utilizing the dribble to break down the defense in order to keep everything honest. So he just comes off the mind. I have no idea what they're doing up there.
Yeah, this is another thing that I was just thinking while you were saying that, is with mid-season trades, especially when it's a contender trading for a team, trading for a player, is there a danger of rocking the boat too much? We've seen in-season trades work when it's for a role player, like a PJ Tucker type player. But for a player of DeMar's magnitude, for example, the Timberwolves, they spent last year figuring out this. I know Cat was injured, but they've kind of taken a season to figure out this fit with the 2 7-footers. Would adding in, because you've got to expend significant salary, and then adding in DeMar DeRozan affect the balance of the team too much? Maybe not just for the Timberwolves, but for any team that's a contender, trading for an additional piece like this. Do you run the risk of having to start from scratch all over again with the coaching and the system that you're playing?
Well, I think, Mo, it leads to a very important point. This is where teams have to really know themselves. It's incumbent upon you as a front office and coaching staff to know the personality of your basketball team, and what type of personality, if you were to trade for someone like this, would that personality fit along with his skill set? So there is the issue. And BJ talked about, his professionalism earlier, and I know I had touched on it as well. When you trade for a professional player like DeMar, who's a good guy, and especially at this stage of his career, it's all about winning for him. He hasn't been able to make it to a finals yet. He's played in an Eastern Conference final, but he wants to try to win a championship. So I think, you factor that in as well. So you're going to bring a player in who more than likely is going to be very amenable to fitting in with what you have there, and then figuring out, where he can assert himself. But again, when you make trades at this point of at that point of the season, close to the trade deadline, while, you point out there may be some sort of risk, it's less of a risk if you really are comfortable, confident, and know your basketball team, and that's your job to know that. So that's what this brings to mind for me.
Well, you mentioned the Lakers as one of the teams that might be interested in him. Do you think adding DeMar DeRozan to the Lakers gives them that extra edge and will take them up to clear contender status?
I think he definitely wouldn't hurt him. And depends again, what do you have to give up for him? But obviously, you're just talking about a big three of LeBron, obviously, and Anthony Davis. Take some of the pressure off of both of those guys in terms of being able to close a basketball game. He can go get his own shot when needed. You can run some things for him at key times of the basketball game, or to even close out a game. So he definitely wouldn't hurt their prospects from where I sit. And I think he would be a very strong addition to that team and to their desires to, again, make another deep run in the playoffs.
The two teams that he had on his list as the kind of preferred destinations was Miami and New York. If we start with Miami, how do you like that fit? Imagining it's a trade of some combination of Duncan Robinson's salary, Kyle Lowry, and some draft picks. How would you see that working for the Miami Heat? Because they've been, well, I want to say surprisingly good, but when the Miami Heat, it's never a surprise, especially the rookie Jaime Jaquez, who's been unbelievable. How would you like that fit with DeMar, Jimmy, and Bam? Because that doesn't leave a lot of three-point shooting on the court.
That could be a little bit of a challenge. The three of those guys, again, love those players you mentioned, and Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. And then you add DeMar to that, you got three guys that kind of play in the same areas of the basketball court. So that could be a little bit challenging. But they've got, in my estimation, one of the best coaches in the NBA, and Eric Spoelstra. So if they went after him, what that would signal to me, if Miami got involved and were interested, that they are very confident and know a way that they could make it all work. And I wouldn't doubt them if they did that, because they've got a track record of success dating back to when I first started in the league, which was 23 years ago.
BJ, we know you love defense. How would you feel about that fit defensively? Because DeMar's not the greatest defender by any stretch right now. I say that respectfully, but how would you imagine that defense working over there in Miami? Because Bam can't do everyone's job for them.
Well, at this stage of my career, I've been able to play against teams that were coached by, Coach Pat Riley. Now he's an executive. And he has seen, as Scott alluded to, whatever he's doing, it seems to work. So I'm not questioning anything he does down there. Okay. He can, whoever he takes and whatever he finds, I may not understand it, but what I know is that he's consistently won. They get to the finals with guys who aren't even drafted, and they're consistently continue to do this year in and year out. So if he says DeMar is the guy, Mo, we'll show up to the finals and we'll see the Miami Heat and we'll say, well, because if it's one thing that we know is consistent, the Miami Heat are going to win. So, but what I will say is that I think DeMar DeRozan is a terrific player for any organization. He's a pro's pro. He's a professional scorer. So the last time I checked, guys, as much as I like to talk about defense and understand it and respect it, last time I checked, whoever scores the most points still is going to win the game. And that I know DeMar can do. Okay. And as Scott knows, he's smiling here. I love scoring too. I learned to appreciate winning as my career advanced. But DeMar can score that basketball with the best of them. And if Pat Riley says so, then I'm all on board.
Mm-hmm. BJ just channeled his inner Will Robinson. I know we talked about Will before. Will Robinson used to always say to me, he said, He said the scoreboard is up there for a reason. The team with the most points wins the game.
Well,
And the only way that Will Robinson can say
Yeah.
that.
well, you say that, but like the other team on his list, the New York Knicks, you've got Julius Randle, you've got Jalen Brunson, you've got RJ Barrett. If they were to make a move for DeMar DeRozan, you would have a bunch of guys operating in the same area. Do you think that fit would work? How would you like the look of that?
It's the same thing that I said about Miami. Again, you'll have a number of players that operate in the same area. You know, obviously Jalen Brunson, excellent in the mid-range. Julius, excellent mid-range, getting to the basket. RJ gets to the rim. But, you know, Jalen Brunson is shooting well over 40% from three. RJ Barrett is shooting close to 40 right now. I think he may have dipped slightly below over the last couple of games. And Julius is capable. So, again, that will be incumbent if they decide to do that again, and all those three guys are there, and DeMar joins that group, then it's going to be incumbent upon Tom Thibodeau and staff to figure that out. And how do you get your four top players on the court along with Mitchell Robinson, and you figure out the best offensive path. But sometimes those are high-level problems to have, and you may rather have that high-level problem than not.
BJ, is it too many cooks in the kitchen if that trade was to happen?
Well, if you're going to make a trade with a player that is as impactful as DeMar DeRozan, you're going to have to give up something. So I would venture to say you're probably going to have to give up one of those players that Scott mentioned, right? RJ Barrett, Julius Randle. I don't think Jalen Brunson is going anywhere.
Nope.
And that's going to change the dynamics of your team. Okay. So, you know, we're talking about, you know, acquiring this player. And that's what makes it interesting with the Miami Heat. You know, I don't think Bam and Jimmy Butler I think those are two untouchable players. Right. And I don't think that changes the dynamic of your team. However, if you're talking about with the Miami Heat, I would argue that one of those players that are currently in their big three or big four, however they want to look at it, that's going to change. And that's going to change the dynamic of their team. So I think going to New York would really change their team drastically, because you're now trying to incorporate 20 points into your team mid-season, and you're going to need that 20 points. Whereas in Miami, you're just adding on to their core group, their core two guys. So, but you know, those are things you have to address, and that's what makes it fun. I think it's a good problem to have, clearly. But in looking at the situation, you know, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Brunson, and these guys, I think Scott is correct. They all operate in the same area. And then now you're trying to put the pieces of this puzzle together. And that's a big move. That's a big move for me, in my own personal opinion, when you start adding a player and taking another player out mid-season and saying, we want to push and really compete for a championship or advancing in the playoffs. I think that's tough to do.